McCoy. I'm the chair of London HR Connection. Wearing a different hat, I'm also an experienced senior HR director, having worked for a range of businesses and sectors for the last 30 years or so. I'm very pleased to be chairing this, which is our third London HR Connection webinar in the series. Many of you may know us better for our live events, but in these times of social distancing, we are currently online only. So I'm afraid you will have to supply your own wine and canapes on this particular broadcast. Hopefully you're all sorted in that respect. A few words about London HR Connection. We've been around since the 1980s. We're a leading networking group for HR professionals. We're affiliated to the CIPD, and we were created as a special interest group for HR people living and working in the London area, although it seems a little less important these days, in these days of remote and virtual working. We do have about 3,000 professionals in the LinkedIn group, and typically we attract up to 100 or so attendees at our events. And we've had a very good response to this particular webinar as well. I've been chair for nearly 7 years, and the board consists of 9 senior professionals, many of whom on the webinar today. We're supported and sponsored by a range of commercial organisations. As you can see, actually, could you go back to the previous slide at all, Denise? The slide is the sponsors, including, of course, our speakers today from Recruitment Business Network HR. So I'm delighted to welcome Chris and Adam today. So next slide, please, Denise. So Chris and Adam, Network HR is part of the Executive Network Group, a leading recruitment business specialising in placing HR professionals all levels. I've known Network HR personally for many years as a client, and in recent times, of course, they've developed deep expertise in virtual and remote recruitment and onboarding, and that's obviously the topic we'll be sharing with us today. I'm also really pleased to welcome Victoria Carr, who's the People Director for international insurance business Volante Global. Victoria was actually recruited via Network HR only 4 months into the role, only 4 months ago, at the height of the lockdown, using processes which were entirely virtual. So she's a perfect example of remote recruitment and onboarding and how it can work well. Okay, so at this point, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Chris Rowlands, the Group Director, Executive Network and Network HR. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Craig. Thank you for the welcome, everyone, and thank you, Craig, for the intro. I did have one planned, but I can't beat that one, so I shall crack on regardless. The Network HR connection with the London HR Connection, that was a mouthful, has been around for 2 years now, and this is our first online event. And it's great to be able to reach out outside of London, outside of the capital. So having looked down the list of attendees, it's great to see people with a varied and broad experience across the HR sphere. So look, if this was a physical event, I'd certainly be looking for your interaction. I'd probably pick on a few people along the way as well to contribute. So please don't feel that this is any different because it's online. We're keen to hear from your experience. You know, the list is fantastic of attendees. So we want to hear your experience as well and to contribute to the conversation. These bullet points are essentially what myself, Adam, my colleague Adam Oliver, who many of you know, and we're delighted to have Victoria Carr with us, as Craig says, from Volante Global, very recently joined Volante Global. We are hoping to, let's be honest, Victoria is the star of the show. So Victoria, I'll do a bit of a warm-up act, and Adam will help along the way in terms of some of his specific research into this topic, but Victoria's got fantastic experience and very recent experience as an onboardee and as an onboarder. So I shall do a bit of preamble prior to that. So I think I'd just start with where this expertise. I think Craig pegged us as experts in the sphere. I think we're all learning. Continually learning, but this presentation was originally put together for the Energy and Utility Skills Partnership, with whom we've worked with for a couple of years now. Their chief exec, Nick Ellins, who's just left their business after a fantastic 5-year tenure. We built a fantastic relationship and we ran HRD roundtables in that space. So they asked us to do a bit of research. It's a very diverse world, energy utility skills. asked us to do some specific research into the virtual onboarding world. And it did take us outside of that. So it's worth saying it's largely anecdotal for fans of and qualitative research. So those fans of graphs and pie charts, I'm afraid you will be let down today. I can only apologise as a fan of pie charts myself. We have zero pie charts. I'm going to put it out there from the start. But what we did do was interview HR directors, talent acquisition specialists across energy utility sector and some wider sectors that we'll mention as well. I'm going to start with just a very quick overview, I guess, of the last 4 or 5 months and what we've all been through and what we continue to go through as HR professionals. The reality is this is we don't know what the future workplace is going to look like, and you know, if you'd said at the start of the year there would be 30% of the working population, so 9 million people in furlough. Firstly, we wouldn't know what furlough meant unless you'd work in the US, and secondly, we certainly wouldn't have any idea of how it would impact the world of work. So look, we don't know if some of the challenges and some of the solutions to those challenges are temporary. I often use the example of virtual meetings and virtual roundtables. I think people are embracing them, and it's good to see, but I tend to think these might be a threshold item. So at the moment, if 60% of your network are using VC 60% of the time, it probably feels like you couldn't live without it. If suddenly, once the post-lockdown world emerges and people feel comfortable meeting face-to-face, only 10% of your network uses it 10% of the time, suddenly it just feels like an inconvenience. So I think the reason to mention that is onboarding and virtual onboarding. I think we should still look at onboarding holistically and see this period as an opportunity just to refresh and revisit onboarding in its entirety. So that's why the first slide is about why it's important to get onboarding right, regardless of whether it's virtual or physical or something in between the two. I'm just seeing the chats as they're coming through. Someone said it will be a shame to return to old habits. I agree with that completely. But we'll look at this topic of onboarding holistically. So I think I've put on there the 3 C's. So I'm giving away some of the topics we're going to discuss. So the 3 C's is something that frankly we look at internally at the Executive Network Group. So we have the same challenges that all of you guys do within your own businesses, and the way that we framed our employee engagement and the way we try and build a working environment that people continue to be engaged by is, I think it was a Facebook. It was Facebook internal survey a few years ago where they looked at what was important to employees and potential employees, and they came up with 3 C's. So if you bump forward 1 slide, Denise, some of you will be familiar with this. It was 2018. Facebook came up with the 3 C's. Within ENG, we thought that sounds fair and right to us, and we've adopted it internally here. So whenever we look at how we structure our offering to potential employees and existing employees, we look at these 3 C's. So 1 being career, the 2nd being cause, and the 3rd being community. So you'll see these themes. The reason to put this slide up, you'll see these themes return throughout. And when we look at onboarding, I think really we want to relate it back to these 3 things. When people join an organisation, these are essentially the 3 things that they care about. Yes, you know, in the current climate, just having a job is important. Let's be straight, and a means of income is important. But once you move past, you know, if you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you go past the immediate, then what's the difference between having an engaged workforce, an engaged employee for a long period of time and not? I think it's these 3 facets. So career is obviously about the work you do. Is it meaningful work? Is there a career path that stretches ahead of you, or does it feel like a day-to-day task? Cause, you know, what's the purpose? I'm not sure if any of you have been on any webinars or roundtables around purpose, but absolutely that's front and center. So Craig, if we haven't done an event on company purpose, I think we should add that to the list, because there's some good things, some good activity around that space at the moment. And the last one is community. You know, what is it? You know, you could interchange that with culture, but I think community is key, and you know, feeling part. And we do a lot of research also around the D&I space, and we did something similar for energy utility skills around diversity and inclusion, and feeling included and represented internally, and having a sense of community is important. So the reason to put that slide up is not to go completely off topic with onboarding, but everything that we talk about will relate back to those 3 areas. So next slide, please, Denise. This is the only slide with text on. So I just thought I'd take you on a bit of a journey. So I just, for 1 second, you don't have to close your eyes. We're not quite there yet. I think we're friendly, but not quite there where we're going to trust each other to shut our eyes and take ourselves to another place. But this is essentially what we're trying to avoid when we onboard someone. So 12 ways to lose a new employee. This is almost the opposite. This is what we're trying to avoid. And just for 1 second, that poor chap on the left there looking miserable. I don't know if there was a happiness index. He'd probably be, maximum 2 out of 10. What's possibly making that reasonably new employee so miserable? I think it's a combination of these things. So just for 1 second, imagine you've recently joined an organisation. You're, I don't know, let's say 2-3 months in, and this is what you're experiencing. So nothing works. IT doesn't work. The systems don't work. Nothing works. It's a disaster. You've absolutely no idea what's expected of you. You have a job title and probably nothing more than that, and it's an ambiguous one at that. You don't feel part of the team. You have a frankly unpleasant manager, which hopefully we've not all been there, but many of us have. I completed my first task, and as it turns out, it was no longer needed. So sent on meaningless tasks with meaningless outcomes. In the first week, I had some time booked with the CEO or the CHRO, which sounded exciting, and then that got cancelled. I've had no feedback on any of the work I've completed to date. I've no idea what my future holds for my career or even for the company. So we're probably touching on the career and cause there. I've just been handed a load of projects to deliver, and I've got 1 week to do it. So unrealistic expectations. And with those projects, my manager's calling me almost every hour asking for an update. So you could question whether I'm trusted or whether they think I'm up to the task. I haven't heard the words thank you since I arrived, and nobody really seems interested in me. So I think we could all agree, I'm going to have to, there's no nodding function on Zoom, so I'll just have to trust that I'm right. That I think if that was your experience of your first couple of months in an organisation, I doubt you'd be there for much longer. So regardless of the employment market that's out there. So essentially, let's spin that on its head for a moment. That's what we're trying to avoid. All of these facets. Why onboard and take onboarding and identify it as a challenge to overcome it is to overcome all of these points. So hopefully, if you do have that slide front and center and try and do make sure that no one in your organisation joins and 2 months down the line is able to say any of those things, then I think you've kind of cracked the nut. So if we go forward to the next slide, Denise. These are essentially, this was the scope, if you like, of the work that we did with energy and utility skills. So pros and cons of virtual onboarding. As I say, this is we've sort of aggregated some very anecdotal and qualitative research, and as I say, it did take us slightly outside of the sector because I don't know if anyone knows about the way that the energy utilities sector works. Is that there's things like AMP6 to AMP7 now in the water industry, and people tend to move on. So lots of the people that we were originally speaking to moved outside of the energy or water sector with regards to AMP7. So we did spread our wings slightly outside of that, which was interesting. But generally, pros and cons of virtual onboarding. Someone's commented on next slide, please. We're going to talk about the pre-start. I think leading up to day one, what's best practice there, and then day one, week one, month one. What systems, what structures, what processes, what can be put in place to make sure that people feel onboarded effectively and are engaged within the team sooner rather than later. So we've got lots of anecdotal evidence, but I think this is where I bring Victoria in. So Victoria, as Craig mentioned there, I'll let Victoria do her own introduction, but we worked with Volante Global and sourced and placed and onboarded virtually Victoria to Volante Global around 4 months ago. So she's been an onboardee as a candidate and experienced what it's like to be virtually onboarded as a candidate, and is now going through a process, a really interesting one actually in terms of the attitude within Volante to virtual working in general. So I'm going to hand over to Victoria at this point, and we'll return to talk about some of the other conclusions that we found when we talked to the wider energy utilities sector. So Victoria, over to you.
Thanks, Jess. So Hi everybody. As Craig and Chris mentioned, I'm going to talk about my personal experience of remote onboarding. So I joined Volante Global in early May as the People Director. And as mentioned, Volante Global is a global insurance MGA and is essentially a mature startup. They've been in business since October 2017. And the People Director role is a new role to build out the people in the HR function. And I'm on my own at the moment, although delighted to have a people partner joining me in September. So in terms of the actual physicality of setup, I bought my own laptop and a second screen, which I then expensed. The day before I joined, I had a call with IT to get set up, and that was a personal choice to get set up the day before, because I could easily have done that on the morning of my start date. And as I'm sure you're aware, IT remote into your laptop, download the software, security you need, got my email set up, etc. And as we're quite a young and nimble company, we have quite good infrastructure to be able to cope with this, and we're coping well at the moment with everybody currently working from home. And I have personally found the whole process incredibly simple compared to being in offices in other companies and start dates in other places that I've worked. So on my first day, I was introduced to the rest of my ex-co colleagues via Teams. And it was the first time that I had actually met the CEO, who's my boss, as we had had an old-fashioned telephone call during the interview process. Following this, I began to set up meetings via Teams to introduce myself to the whole company. We're a small company, just under 70 people globally, so it wasn't onerous for me to speak to everybody individually. We've got people located in Zurich, Stockholm, Berlin, Toronto and Atlanta. I didn't find speaking to people via Teams particularly unusual because I had been at home with my previous firm since mid-March, so I was used to it by that point. And in the 3.5 months since I've joined, I feel that I've built up very good working relationships with my boss, the rest of the exco and with the rest of the group. I have weekly one-to-ones with various people and attend a number of committees and a number of project working groups. We continue to recruit. We had 5 people that joined during lockdown before I had joined, and we've had 9 people that have joined after me. And this also includes 3 additional exco members. Our Chief of Staff, our Chief Risk Officer and our COO joined us 2 weeks ago. The process for them has been equally smooth. We've had people join us who were actually planning to move to London prior to lockdown, and I've ended up staying in their home locations of Norfolk, Bedford and Belfast. Will they move to London anytime soon? Who knows? We are interviewing people currently, doing that via Teams. We had another 2 joiners that joined us on Monday. We've got another person due to start this coming Monday, and we have a further 3 people that will join in September. I've also just made an offer out for a sandwich placement student to join us for a year on various rotations. She will obviously join remotely and will most likely spend the majority of her placement remote working as well. All our line managers are speaking with their teams every day, sometimes several times per day. People have really gotten into the habit of calling people on Teams rather than using their mobiles. At first, I think people were quite reluctant to do that because they thought that they might be bothering someone, but now everybody just gets on with it. Nobody bats an eyelid about that now. If people miss a call on Teams, just like on your mobile, people just call you back. And when I joined, obviously, as we were in lockdown at the time, the guidance at the time was we would all work from home until the end of May, which I then extended out until the 1st of September. I think what's important to mention is that the CEO, who is absolutely fantastic, started up this company, and mostly everyone that has joined has either worked directly with him before or has worked with other teams before. So the engagement levels that we have as a company are actually quite high. And in terms of some of the things the company has done around engagement, this year everyone was paid an extra day simply because it was a leap year. When lockdown happened, the CEO circulated an email to say everyone would be paid an extra £100 per month to use for whatever they wanted. You know, if it was buying extra groceries, people wanted to get a Netflix account, you know, whatever. We've since stopped that since we've come out of lockdown, with the caveat that if we did go back into lockdown, we would look to reinstate it. Over the last few months, subject to workload and line manager agreement, we've given everybody a free half day off to do whatever they like, really, but specifically because we've been having a lot of nice weather. We've done that twice now. We've also said, again, subject to workload and line manager agreement, that people can finish early around sort of 2-3 p.m. on the last Friday of every month. So these are quite simple things, but they work and people appreciate it and they do thank us for it. It's quite interesting and refreshing, because I've never really worked in a company before where people are actually genuinely grateful for a lot of things that you do. I mean, obviously there's pockets of it in other companies, but I do tend to get a lot of responses when I circulate emails like that. In June, I circulated a working from home survey, which I'm sure that you've all done the same thing, just in order to understand how people want to work on an immediate basis, as in the next 3 to 6 months, and on a longer term, more permanent basis. I also sent the survey out to new joiners who at that point hadn't joined, as their opinion is also important. So just in terms of the working from home themes, some of the themes that came out, I wanted to share that with this group. If we could move on to the next slide, Denise, please. Thank you. So there really was an overwhelming theme of wanting to continue to work from home with flexibility, and to do this on a longer term, more permanent basis, and to potentially have broker hubs, meeting spaces, rather than an actual dedicated office. So as a result of that, we've taken a decision as a company to move to become a working from home company with limited office space globally. We actually have a town hall tomorrow to announce the working from home survey results, and a bit unfortunate timing that this webinar is today, because it would have been good to have shared some of the immediate reactions that people would have had as well. We've concluded that by cancelling all of our leases at the earliest opportunity, we will save up to £685,000 over the next 18 months, which is not an insignificant amount, and we're in discussions with our provider to do this. So whatever our office space will look like, we expect that teams will meet around, you know, maybe once or twice a month for team meetings, strategy days, that sort of thing. We don't necessarily want people to come into the office to do what they can do at home. We will, however, allow the facility of people to attend the office more regularly should they wish to do that. And after the town hall announcement, I will canvass the MDs to find out exactly how they would like their teams to operate. As everybody knows, insurance is typically viewed as being slightly more old-fashioned. You know, people being suited, booted in the city 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and actually being forced into this situation to work from home has really revolutionised people's mindsets, and that came out quite strongly in some of the comments. So there was 3 themes that came out: the work-life balance, the cost saving, and the productive and effective working. And just in terms of a couple of comments that people have made, I'll read that out. So it has enabled me to address the work-life balance positively. The time spent with my children is worth a lot to me, and I would hope the company consider the importance of this when making assessments about being back in the office. Not having to commute has been a big positive, as has the greater flexibility to get little jobs done that would always have to wait until the weekend. The weekends feel better for it. In terms of cost saving, saves money on food, travel, etc., which probably more than offsets the extra cost of heating and electricity. It feels unnecessary, expensive and inconvenient, with no benefit to the business to return to the office. There is a clear opportunity to cost save and reduce office space. And in terms of the productive and effective working, not commuting has meant greater focus and less distractions for me. The work can be done, brokers are looked after more satisfactorily, and I don't feel clients have suffered. If anything, we are more productive, people still feel part of a team, and the company prospers. And one particular comment that I wanted to draw in terms of the insurance industry is the company must embrace the change our industry needs and put employees at the origin of the business. Engaged employees generates the highest productivity. So we move on to the next slide, please, Denise, thanks. So what's next for us as a company? Well, we obviously still have a lot of work to do. You know, we're still growing and we're still at the very start of building out what a people HR offering looks like. We're learning, we're on a journey, and I'm sure we'll make mistakes along the way and we'll learn from that. Just in terms of the things that I've done, which is reasonably simple, but remember, we didn't have a lot of these things in place before. So I've signed up to our EAP provider because they didn't currently have that. And I'm researching other EAP offerings from our other providers in other locations. In terms of wellbeing, I know a lady who is a healer and a coach and is absolutely fantastic. I can't honestly recommend her highly enough. And I'm happy to share details if anybody would like that. She's going to deliver a session for us for the Exco in the next few weeks, and then we'll roll that out to the wider group. And I expect that we will have our run sessions with us on a fairly regular basis. We'll require everybody to have assessments and to properly enable them to work from home. We'll put guidance out as to what equipment we would expect people to have as a minimum. There'll be no set amount on expenses, as it's important for everybody to be set up correctly and everybody's needs are different. We'll also conduct security review if people have been printing confidential documents at home and if they have the ability to destroy them securely. Our company policy already covers for any damages to our equipment, so there's no need for people to insure that themselves, unless of course it is their personal property. And in terms of some of the comments, yeah, I appreciate this approach. It's probably not for everybody, and some people might be horrified at the thought of it. And of course, it's got its pros and cons like everything, but it works well for us as a small company and we like it. You know, I personally love it. And also, if we're not specifically wedded to certain locations, it then widens out the talent pool. I think it's also important to finish by saying that COVID hasn't hugely affected us as a business. We continue to recruit, as mentioned, and our gross written premium has stayed in line with our growth plan trajectory. So we've been very, very lucky as a company and as individuals to have the opportunity to work for this company, as obviously not everybody has had the same experience. Thank you, and I will hand back to Chris now.
Thank you, Victoria. I did see a few questions come through. I've got one myself, but I think we'll try and save those towards the end, and we'll make it more of an interactive kind of debate at the end. But I think one of the obvious ones, which we'll move forward to in a second, is around working from home. Is it for everyone? Is it even possible for everyone to work from home? You know, there's lots of arguments for social mobility. You know, if you don't need to travel into a city centre, it negates that need to be in an urban or access to an urban environment in order to be able to work for your business. But equally, does raise some challenges from a social perspective in terms of whether people have that access and ability to work from home. So lots of points to come back to. Thank you for that, though, Victoria. I thought that was fantastic. In terms of what you'll see on this slide here, Victoria's covered her view and Volante's view on some of these. I'm just going to now expand it out into the survey that we did with the energy and utility skills sector. So when I talk about pros and cons, I'm just going to pick out some of the themes that were consistent. And we had a follow-up roundtable, so I guess we were able to use that roundtable to arrow in on the consistent themes. And actually, certainly once we move into day one, week one, month one, we almost arrived at a sort of model as to how might be best to do that. Whether you guys agree with it or think it's right or wrong, I'll be interested to hear. But from a pros and cons perspective, we'll start with the cons, because I think one of the obvious steps to take is to look at how you've onboarded people previously and try and take it into the virtual world. Well, I think there's an argument as to whether that's a good stance or not. But if you look at that, then the logistics of just getting equipment to people rather than just setting up a desk in an office presents challenges. The lack of human and physical interaction, you know, so much of communication is lost when you're not able to engage directly. So that was listed as a problem. This was interesting, I think. Some found that they felt it was a more formal and more impersonal method of onboarding. You don't get those opportunities just to have a chat in the kitchen or in the canteen, it didn't feel, particularly for this organisation, who I won't name, but didn't feel like there were those opportunities for social interaction. There is an absolute reliance on IT and technology. So with most virtual onboarding programs, if you cannot get the IT and get the tech to them, you can't onboard them, which wouldn't be exactly the same in an office environment. And company culture. So I did see a question come through from Victoria on company culture. And I think it was deemed to be more difficult to articulate and certainly engage people in the company culture when people are virtually onboarded. So that's definitely something we'll come back to at the end. Victoria, as to how you've embedded culture within Volante. I think the pros, these won't be a surprise, I shouldn't imagine, but the flexibility, location and travel is no longer an issue. I think in particular where you've got multi-site operations and HQs in locations different to where the individuals are based, that's more easily overcome. Diary, I didn't think of this one actually prior to the survey, but diary control came in terms of if and actually the way to do this actually is whether you Teams or Zoom. Obviously there's lots of options out there now in the lockdown world, but actually one of the advantages of that is if you have a dedicated room for this individual, when one meeting ends and the next person is either in the lobby waiting or enters the room, then pretty much that hour has come to an end. So in terms of diary management and making sure people stick to their diary, there's a strange advantage there. Accessibility to leaders. I think in the past, trying to get some diary time, I mentioned it in the 12 ways to lose an employee, that time with the CEO or the CHRO or a leader within the business, far easier to do that remotely than it would be potentially face to face. And also an opportunity then to build a more informal potential relationship with a leader. So it could feel quite stagnant environment in an office or quite a formal environment. Whereas, if you can see the pictures of their favourite holiday destinations in the background, if they're working from home as well, it just makes it a little bit more personal. And also tech, I think one of the pros was that it's tested and improved companies' engagement with technology. And technology in this space is not necessarily as expensive or as prohibitive as people may think. So they were the pros and cons listed. I think the biggest mistake is one that I mentioned at the start is to try and shoehorn your existing onboarding process into a virtual world. I think it's an opportunity to refresh completely. Lockdown has presented lots of opportunities to refresh and review the way we do things, and I think onboarding is probably added to that list. If we go on to pre-start, again, these are some themes that came up regularly. So these are actually kind of, I guess you'd probably list these as if you were to do things exceptionally well, you might do all of these things. So the first thing is just in terms of communication and clarity. So make sure they have, and then a list. So make sure they have a contract of employment, make sure they have a job description, make sure they have an understanding of the career path if that is applicable to their role. Make sure they've got a clear overview of remuneration and the additional benefits associated with it. This one often gets missed, but make sure they're clear on their first pay day. What's the first day they're going to get paid? Make sure they're clear on working hours. If they are being virtually onboarded, but then heading to an operational site, make sure they have information on that operational site, particularly with some of the restrictions we have at the moment. So parking, travel, try and do as much of that legwork for them as possible. Key contact details for people prior to start. There are obviously online systems, and we use Teams here. So if we have Teams, then the internal contact list is built onto that, but don't assume and obviously make sure people have contact details and aren't sat there not knowing what the IT support number is. And also try and onboard and use a tool that takes them through that process. I'll come back to technology, but this is far from an endorsement. Other technology platforms are available, but the one that came up a few times was something like Page Tiger, which is a great tool for actually ticking a lot of those boxes in terms of contract of employment, JD, career path. Make sure that all that information's there and accessible in one place, but also you don't get the next bit of information until you've completed what you need to complete the previous stage. So if you need to give your bank details, you don't get to see week one on board until you've given those details across. So I'll come back to tech, but those are some of the things that you need to make sure they have. Other things that really came up, and again, we got lots of nods and virtual thumbs up on the round table. Sending a profile of the person around the team and encouraging team members to reach out to them, whether it's via social media. Two of the interactions which came up strongly were either a quick video from the CEO, just welcoming them. That could be generic, and if you've got a small team, maybe make it personal, but for bigger businesses, make it a bit more generic. But also someone who does the job, if suitable. So someone who works in that team, who already does that job and just talks about what they do on a day-to-day basis. On that front, assigning a buddy did come up as a positive move as well. I'll come back to buddies maybe in the kind of week 1, week 2 and onboarding, but assigning a buddy and arranging time for them to introduce themselves was cited as a good move. The IT, I've mentioned it earlier, but just make sure it's there at least a day before, ideally, or at least on the morning of their first day, and ask IT. I mean, I think IT departments usually take a hammering, but I'd kind of say that our IT department here did a great job through lockdown of making sure everyone was able to work from home, and ask. This is something they did. Ask IT to upload as many company-specific programs and systems as possible, so it's not a case of they spend their first 3 hours of the day downloading tools onto their laptop. Make sure they've obviously got logins and passwords prior to start. Other things to do is to obviously pre-book important activities and events in their diary to make sure that they've got a good idea of what's coming in their first few weeks and months. Not for everyone, but I know a couple of the utilities business do this. So send them out some corporate goodies. Make their desk feel like a desk that they might have at work. So. And one company, again, I should probably name them because this is a very nice thing to do, but they actually sent out breakfast to their team on the first morning. So that might be something you want to throw in the mix there, Victoria. But actually sending out breakfast on day one, I thought was a really nice touch. I hasten to add they're one of the small suppliers into the utility sector, not one of the big energy suppliers. That would be quite a costly activity and with the public purse as well. So probably not too healthy. So that's some of the pre-start stuff. And then we're into day 1, week 1, month 1. So these are kind of combined. Again, these are the combination and the aggregate of some of the good practices that we saw. The first thing is don't try and rush it through. I think one of the mistakes and that some of the HRDs stuck their hand up to was to try and just fill the diary, to feel like downtime is dead time, and to almost feel that if they weren't assigning a task or an event for every part of the day, that this person would feel left out and let down in terms of their onboarding. So look, people need time to digest, and overloading them with information has more negatives than positives. So I thought that was a good point, and that was one that was consistent. Again, this is something we arrived at the round table. I'm not sure if everyone would agree with this. I'm not sure how I feel about it actually, but actually they talked about theme days, having a theme day, so they in line with the types of activities that were consistent. So if we use that an example, where we arrived when we had this round table of about 12 or 13 HRDs and heads of talent across the sector, the survey obviously extended far beyond that, was to maybe day 1, naturally, IT tech systems in the morning, make sure people are fully up to speed, they're fully set up, and they are live and ready to rock and roll. And then a bit around company purpose, so give them the holistic view of the business in the afternoon. Look at the leadership introductions if you can, do CEO introductions or send a CEO video, something along those lines. Virtual office tour. I know that Thames Water, they did it as part of their return to work program, but they did a virtual office tour. So somebody did a little tour of the office and actually said, this is where your team sits when the time returns, or certainly did do in the past. And it actually just gave them a feel for what that would look like. In terms of day 2, we talked there earlier, didn't we, about career and what's important in terms of good working practices. So digging some more into the role, into ongoing projects, into key contacts, be sure to clearly define the roles, objectives, and the future career opportunities. I think day 3 then was mentioned, maybe get a tick in the box around community. So talk about, and this is important to people, particularly when they are remote, and if you are going to pay particular attention to inclusivity and representation within your business, then make sure people are aware of the social opportunities, make sure they're aware of the community networks, the diversity networks that the company has, the CSR opportunities, but also some of the key client relationships and some of the key people they'll be interacting with externally and internally as well. And then as we move into day 4, I think then more so you're getting down into the crux of the role. So an opportunity for them to demonstrate their competencies. I think this was quite interesting as well. It's not necessarily something that I thought of, but one of the organisations talked about, it was someone who'd been onboarded actually, and talked about they'd been given the opportunity towards the end of the first week just to do a virtual presentation, and we're doing here about the thing they'd learned, the biggest lesson they'd learned so far in their career. It just gave them an opportunity to not just socially interact with people, but actually give a little something back and talk about their experience and give them a bit of credibility, which is always nice when you join a new organisation. And then feedback. I mean, I think, probably at the end of a week 1 of work, I think hopefully most of you guys who've onboarded people in the past will look for feedback, certainly at the latest at the end of their first week, and start planning for the week ahead. So I think a lot of these are fairly traditional in terms of good onboarding practice, but I think some of these opportunities that present themselves in a virtual world is that you can pre-plan a lot of these things. So as I say, you can get videos, and I think that's one of the things that came up of and it's a note here I've got at the bottom of the notes that we made of the survey, is to use multimedia as much as possible. In terms of presenting, the advantage of virtual onboarding is the technology, and actually some will engage with videos, some will engage with text, some will want a simple phone call, others will want a Teams call or a Zoom call, and the more you present to them in various mediums, the more likely you are to engage. And if you do get the feedback and you start to notice that an individual tends to engage in one way more so than another, then you can tailor to that in the future. I'm not sure if we've got any L&D specialists in the audience, but you'll be very pleased to hear that Onboard has, in general, preached the power of a high-functioning L&D platform in terms of feeling engaged in the business. And that certainly helped, if we go back to the 3 C's, in terms of developing them in their career, their ability to do the job, but also what their career will look like in the future. Just that long term, and knowing that there's a commitment there, whether it's virtually or whether it's just a virtual platform for L&D, that this was absolutely endorsed almost across the board from those that have been onboarded, that actually having a strong L&D platform and a high function L&D platform was one of the big ticks in the box of feeling engaged with the business from the start, and knowing that they joined a good business because their skills and their development was being taken seriously. I think that takes us pretty much to so just a quick point on trust, and I'm going to come back to this later, but one of the challenges which was put forward was the communication around expectations, trying to find the balance between not micromanaging, not communication is key, as they say, but actually there's a difference between communicating and micromanaging, as we all know. So clarity came out, and that need to talk task-based all the time came up as a flag in terms of highlighting a lack of trust. There's a difference between checking in and communicating regularly and making someone feel like they're being micromanaged. And if every conversation was coming back to the next task and the next activity, and doesn't talk more holistically about their role in the business and the purpose and their career, then it can feel like a micromanagement process. One of the things that was mentioned here, again, there's a couple of businesses who contributed who were in they were tech providers in and around the energy utility sector. And I know this is popular in that space, but OKRs came up. I think we're delving outside of onboarding here, but certainly in terms of how to engage people from a working from home environment. So it's a new, well, not necessarily new. I think it's a fair few years old now, the OKR kind of model. But I know a lot of tech businesses use that as an alternative to KPIs. So OKRs for those that haven't come across it yet. It's very popular with Google, use it, Amazon use it, Airbnb use it as their method of assessing individuals. It's just objective key results. And we didn't necessarily, it was raised by one of the tech businesses as a method that they've engaged to try and remove that need for micromanagement, and just to talk about the objective of your role is X, and these are the key results we expect, and everything after that point we trust you to not necessarily figure out for yourself, but to make good judgment and engage with the business in order to solve those, hit those results and achieve those objectives. So again, it was in my notes, so I thought it was worth mentioning out there. In terms of virtual, to go back to the virtual world as well, I think Onboarders mentioned the advantage of being included on project management tools. So again, I'm aware that these tools were already being used prior to us going into lockdown, but they've become more prevalent and become more valuable, I think. So tools like Slack and Trello and Monday.com were regularly mentioned as methods of engaging people, and just being able to see the track of a project and the history of a project from an employee perspective, I think, rather than just, okay, here's a client and here's the work we do for them. I think that it helped people feel part of the business a lot sooner. And then lastly, in the virtual world, again, I've said it already, but communication is absolutely key. So the communication which I think Onboarders liked was around company news. So not just around communication from line managers or communication on ongoing projects, but also how's the company doing? How's the company reacting? Well, I guess you could argue this is lockdown specific or COVID-19 specific, but how is the business performing? What measures is the business putting in place? And, you know, whether it's a weekly video from the CEO or a weekly call from the HRD or whoever the ultimate line manager is, but that regular communication of how the business is performing, how the business is evolving and reacting, that was flagged by many as the right method of communication, and certainly wasn't deep micromanaging, but giving key information and important information about the business and how it's performing.
Chris, I think I'll just contribute to your point on some of the project management tools, and also give the audience a moment to admire my mandatory lockdown beard as well. I thought I would add to some of the research that we pulled out of the conversations with CEOs and some of the CHROs that we were speaking to across sector, in that many of them were looking for a framework, a methodology, a process that wasn't directly linked to a bespoke or new technology to be introduced to their LMS or to their business. And I think there's no secret sauce when it comes to the right balance of online versus personal delivery when it comes to personal onboarding. But most of the organizations that we spoke to had essentially a very similar project management framework that I would liken to something like RACI. I think RACI is a methodology that most of us are familiar with. If not, it stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And essentially what many organizations were using this for was more of a responsibility assignment matrix. And it allowed hiring managers to, I suppose, strike a balance between managing their own personal workload, as well as ensuring a very engaging and consistent remote onboarding experience. I think historically, when remote onboarding has been done, there has been a disproportionate emphasis on transactional duties. And sometimes that means that people are scrambling to deliver on their day-to-day objectives as well. So I'll send it around after this, of course, just some information to the RACI model. I'd encourage you all to take a quick look at it. It's very simple. It's very clear and concise. So I thought it would be good just to raise that as a point, as a sort of cost-effective, free of charge, but very simple framework to use, just to ensure that you're allocating time accordingly. But yeah, I just thought I'd throw that one in there. Chris, back to you.
Thank you, Adam. Worth mentioning there as well. So we will follow up with a few details. So I did mention tech there. There's others that we're going to mention later as well. Again, other tech is available, but these are just some of the consistent ones that came up, which HRDs and talent acquisition specialists mentioned had really helped with the onboarding process and in some ways with the recruitment process as well. So happy to send those round afterwards. So in terms of the next slide, it's just an image. You'll get used to these, but it is going to touch on something that Victoria mentioned. So moving to a working from home environment. Look, white collar, the challenges of white collar versus the challenges of kind of blue collar or highly operational. If you look at the energy utility sector, you've got some head office staff or some office-based staff, but you've also got a large team of operational people out in the field who are highly skilled engineers or first line of a response to urgent issues in and around whether it's the utility network, energy network, or the electricity network or gas network, water network. And we wanted to dig in a little bit into actually what challenges they presented. I think in all honesty, it presented more questions than answers from a blue collar perspective. So I've got some very specific examples here. These companies don't mind me mentioning them. So they were discussed openly at the round table, and I have consulted them to see if they're happy for me to mention it today. So one of the this is outside of sector actually. It was an individual who'd moved outside of the sector and moved into the train and bus operating world. And they said their head office staff and the call centre staff onboarding had been incredibly efficient, and their staff were up to speed quicker than they would have expected in an office environment. They were productive, and it was cost efficient. All of the things that Victoria and I alluded to earlier. Operationally, so you're talking, onboarding train drivers, bus drivers, they found that really, really challenging, and actually identifying and supporting skill gaps. I talked earlier about an L&D platform. Well, is there an L&D platform potentially that would solve that from a bus driver's perspective? I'm not sure necessarily there is. So they didn't have any answers to that, and actually that was a consistent theme. So again, when we get to the Q&A session, I'd like to make that interactive and see any of those of you who work with more blue collar environments, actually how you overcame that. A company, Interserve, who some of you would be familiar with, again, they've got a lovely shiny new head office not far from us here in Solihull, and the office-based staff absolutely worked from home when needed, moved into the office space, and actually virtually onboarding new staff was not difficult at all. They've got lots of people frontline in a variety of engineering and hands-on roles, and they really struggled. Their method of overcoming it was to do, I'm going to use a phrase here you'll all hate, so please don't throw it in my direction. They did a 2-day onboarding but reboarding. I know everyone hates that phrase. I mean, don't blame me. I hate it too. But actually, so anyone who was furloughed and returned off furlough, they gave them the same 2-day onboarding session at the head office as they did for any new staff. Again, they chose it for only to be 2 days. It was a high level first day in terms of the business, the purpose. Interserve have definitely been on a journey, if anyone knows that organisation, over the last couple of years, through pre-pack administration and everything else in between. So they talked about the business, they talked about the career opportunities internally, and then they talked about the realities of working within Interserve, whether that be from an office base or from a site based or mobile engineering perspective. So again, that was their method of overcoming it, of treating on board as the same way as returning staff and trying to engage them that way. Obviously they did it socially distanced, but they've got a fairly big office down in Solihull, so they did it in tranches. One interesting one actually was SES Water, who actually onboarded their new chief exec through lockdown. So they had quite interesting perspective, and the chief exec gave a few examples of some of the challenges they faced. Most chief execs, or very, the C-suite, in their first 100 days, one of their first plans is to walk the floor, isn't it? Get the pulse of the business, and that's very difficult to do from your back bedroom. So that was actually cited as a challenge. How do you get a pulse of a business from whilst never leaving your house? But on the other side of the coin, it was great for visibility. They were probably more visible to their teams and to their business in the first 100 days than they probably ever would have been previously through online platforms and online videos, VCs, etc. So strengths and challenges there. I think the blue collar challenge. Lots of businesses were really honest and said they've actively avoided hiring operational and blue collar staff. Or they'd done it in large tranches so they could make the onboarding so what didn't need to be as consistent as it is. You could probably make it when staff are working from home or in more white collar environments. So they were honest and said, look, we've seen it as a challenge that were a really tough one to overcome. Some of them relied on their clients. So some of these this is quite an interesting conversation. Some of the suppliers or the contractors into the utilities businesses said, well, our guys, so if it's an Interserve, for example, our guys were coming to work on a Thames Water site, so we relied on Thames Water to onboard them effectively, which is nice. Slight delegation of responsibility there, but actually, you know, it's a good point in that it's a combination of those two working environments, and probably both are responsible for onboarding them effectively. And I think that one of the things that was mentioned was that where the need is significant and urgent for blue collar workers, they just kind of muddled through, and I think probably if they had their high, you know, if they reviewed it, they probably would have changed lots of things. But actually, it's a challenge that lots of businesses struggle with. So again, there wasn't many answers actually that came out of that particular part of the survey. And when we ran the roundtable, I think lots of companies held their hands up and said, look, you know, we furlough staff, we've managed on smaller operational teams. It fits with probably our view on cost savings at the moment. So it's a problem we probably kick down the road a little bit. So again, if you can help those businesses solve their problems, then there may be a consultancy opportunity for you there. We're getting towards the end, so I know we want a bit of time for Q&A. So a couple of common themes here, Denise. So a couple of things that came up. Victoria and I, we had a pre-meeting ahead of this presentation, and I think there was definitely some consistency here. I think the two consistent themes that came up that companies really wanted to address were well-being and trust. So there were two themes that came up consistently when other businesses have done as Victoria has at Volante and surveyed their own staff. Was lots of companies are very reactive to well-being, particularly EAP programs are fantastic, but they are quite reactive. And for those companies who are on the journey of trying to engage in a proactive well-being program, it's quite a difficult thing to do when people are more distant. And again, one of the ways of overcoming that was mentioned as a really good learning and development platform. Other things that were mentioned where there's some really, they're very simple tools to use, but there's a tool, I think it's Deloitte that actually came up with it, or I've got one of the versions of this tool, where individuals wake up in the morning and they are asked a set of questions when they log onto the system, which is, how well did you sleep last night? How motivated do you feel to work today? And lots of questions that are just very personal to them. And over time, again, if you have an occupational health department or if you outsource that, they can build a picture of those individuals and actually where the flags are so that they can try and have some intervention prior to those becoming issues. But I think, look, there's challenges across the board here. I think of those, I attended a great session, actually, London HR Connection session a while back around wellbeing, and it was highlighted there. But I think one of the mental health obviously comes up regularly, work-life harmony comes up regularly, physical well-being is something that's mentioned a lot, but financial well-being is often one that gets overlooked. And I think in the current world that we live in, and the future world, post lockdown and post COVID world that we live in, it will be interesting to see how companies address that. So that was one of the areas that came out. Trust again was one that was just highlighted as a challenge from both sides. So companies wanted individuals to know they were trusted, but equally individuals want to know that they could be trusted, and it's just how you build those kind of measures in. So again, the OKRs that I mentioned earlier, being having a relationship that's based on key results and not based on micromanagement, that's based on a key objective or a set of key objectives is one way of overcoming that. Excuse me. And another thing was to try and build, to go back to wellbeing slightly, we should try and build wellbeing into work. So rather than trying to address wellbeing as an individual challenge, which just runs alongside the work activities, was to try and embed it in work. So one of our sister companies, Network HR's sister company, works in the world of health and safety. and there's been some great work done in that, and it's termed safety by design. So it's designing safety into methods and operational methods of work. And I think there's an argument that there's some way to go of potentially doing that with well-being as well. So again, companies are trying to make strides in order to embed well-being in methods of work, whether that's regular breaks in the day and little prompts. I know that Craig and I talked about this last week. There's a business who use nudges through the day, and they just appear in people's Outlook diary and just give them gentle nudges. It's something they've signed up to from a well-being perspective. So it may be that they want to take more physical activity through the day, or they want to make sure they take enough breaks, or they have lots of different kind of nudges through the day. And this just pops up in their work diary and gives them little reminders to make sure that it's not all work, no play. I can give you a personal anecdote there. I've got a 4-year-old son and a now 6-week-old son, and being able to draw a line between when work stops and life, your home life begins, when the only difference is whether your laptop's open or whether the office door's shut, can be a real challenge. So these little nudges through the day, I think, is a good method of doing that. And I mentioned technology, so there's a picture of someone that looks like technology on the next slide, but just to we'll send these around, because again, I'm always, we want some actionable kind of results out of today's session, I think. So employability checks is obviously something that's been done online for a long time, but there's lots of avenues to do that. And page tag, as I say, as an onboarding tool, was mentioned by quite a few. No one could really compete on that front. From a project management perspective, I mentioned these earlier: Monday, Trello, Slack. From a virtual wellbeing tool, there was, I think it's Mercer's tools that recently launched. So Ondo was one that a couple of the businesses in the energy utilities world had on board and spoke very positively about. There's a couple of other tools here. My Kind of Future, or Connector, I think is the operational name for that platform. And then Holaroo was another one. And I think this was mentioned by Thames Water on our roundtable, actually, but I thought this was just worth demonstrating the power of technology and how easy some of these tools are to get a result. So this is more around virtual recruitment than virtual onboarding. But Thames Water used a text technology, agenda technology. I think Textio is the one they use, but others are available, to remove masculine language from their job adverts, and for their frontline roles. So you're talking process technicians, individuals out in the field, engineers out in the field. They saw female applications rise from 8% to 46%, which I think it's an incredible increase. So I think, look, use technology, whether it's virtual recruitment or virtual onboarding. Look at the pieces of technology that are out there and embed them where you can. And then the last slide really is to throw a phrase out there that I'd never heard before, maybe showing my years here, and maybe Adam had heard of it certainly before I had, but some of you will be familiar with the phrase FOMO, so fear of missing out. Well, the new phrase you need to get familiar with is FOMU, which is fear of meeting up. Yes, it was mentioned by a couple of people. So, and just accept the fact that it's actually becoming habitual to avoid others. So one of the companies we spoke to, again, this was a HRD who moved out of sector and actually worked for the Prince's Trust now, but said that they had real issues with some workers refusing or really challenging returning to work and coming off furlough. And the reasons weren't all health related, as you might think. Some cited financial reasons, and more so having now found a new way of balancing work and life, were concerned about the impact that it might have returning to work. So FOMU is the, if I leave you with nothing else, then FOMU is the phrase that I shall leave you with. I think the next slide just says questions. So I shall hand back to our enigmatic leader, Craig McCoy.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank
you to you and to Adam, Victoria, for all of your insights and experience. So we've got a lot of questions coming through online. We will have time to answer them all, I'm sure. And I've got some of my own as well. And I want to start to broaden out the discussion a little bit as well into more what's happening in terms of the HR recruitment market, which I'm sure people will be interested in as well. But if I can start with you, Victoria, I'm really interested in the online recruitment process, and I wondered to what extent, obviously, I guess you were interviewed and maybe you had a panel interview, or do you have any kind of form of assessments online, any tests, any presentation you had to give? I'm just interested in your experience on that.
In terms of me, no, I didn't. I had a conversation with the CEO, and then I had a conversation with General Counsel, and the other ExCo members did the same, and then they moved on pretty quickly in terms of offers. I think, and Adam would be testament to this as well, I think Talby, our CEO, was pretty clear on what he was looking for, and equally pretty clear on what he wasn't. So it's certainly the quickest and easiest recruitment process that I've gone through. In terms of what we're doing, I think it's important to reiterate that Volante is essentially a startup, and there's no processes in place for anything. You know, when I say nothing, I do mean nothing. There's no HR system, we've no screening provider, we've got no processes and procedures, we've got no induction process. So it's great and it's carte blanche, but equally it's not for everybody. So we're on a journey to build out all of that. And in terms of what we're doing at the moment, we're quite clear with the agents that we're using that we're working from home at this point in time and will likely continue. And I interviewed a girl last week for a compliance role when we've put an offer out to her, but I did indicate that we would be moving to working from home as a company, and if she would be comfortable with that. And people are comfortable with it, but equally we appreciate that it's not for everybody, so we need to be open and upfront about that at the beginning.
Makes sense. Thank you. So can I broaden that out maybe to Chris and Adam? So are you seeing much use of online testing as part of senior hiring for HR people?
I'll let you go, Adam.
Yes.
I agree.
So I think online testing has always been a likely option for many senior hiring or many senior hires generally. I think we have seen a significant increase now. I think that a lot of people are using more tools that incorporate elements of predictive validity, and particularly around engagement and communication styles. I think that as we talk about the future skills that are required in our organizations, no longer do we require such significant subject matter expertise in an inch wide, mile deep capacity. I think the new and more important skills now are coming to the fore, linked to things like collaboration, engagement, facilitation. And I think that is where we're seeing a lot of our clients really, I suppose, focus their time and effort when it comes to online testing. The one thing to mention is that the aptitude testing has always been there, but this is very much around behaviour. And the behavioural testing, it's not definitive. It's all very subjective, and it's all very much related to context in an organisation. So we have seen an increase in that, and that will continue. But again, my point on this, my background's occupational psychology. My point on this is to always only use an assessment that has got BPS accreditation, because there are many assessments out there that are not peer reviewed and they don't have the statistics or the metrics to back it up. But yes, to answer the question, we have seen an increase in online testing and assessments.
Is that behaviours as well as ability, cognitive ability, numeric, all that kind of stuff as well?
Yeah, so I think the emphasis of things like aptitude testing, I think that has sort of tailed off a little bit, especially for senior hiring. I mean, look, the reality is, if someone's got 25 years of experience as a senior HR leader or senior executive committee member, there's a general understanding that they've done enough to earn their stripes. But I think from a behavioural perspective, if an individual can't add to the cultural dynamic of a board or executive committee, then there are questions about what value that person can bring. So, you can't cheat the test. A lot of these are self-report methodologies, and that is where we've seen a significant investment.
Cool,
just a small point on this. I'm actually quite excited about what it's doing for the senior hire market, because I know this is a question around recruitment more so than onboarding, but there are so many, look, recruitment processes haven't really changed for a long time, have they? I know we've embedded some behavioural or psychometric profiles into them, but actually lots of, and even HRDs who you'd think would probably have evolved past this point, still have said to Adam and I, he'll know, Adam will know who I'm talking about here, said, oh, I'll know in the first minute if I'm going to hire them or not. And actually, at least this is challenging the way that people hire. It inherently removes some biases. The fact that you can't, test the strength of the handshake and all those silly metrics that we've used previously, and actually does look at competencies. It arrows in on competencies, it arrows in on behaviours, it arrows in on actually the key things that are important to undertaking a role. So I'm actually quite excited about the shift or the nudge that it's given the recruitment industry.
Yeah, it might actually improve things. Thank you. Let's go to the first of our Q&A. This is from Sarah, which has the most kind of votes. So this is about young people. Young people definitely are going to struggle, I think, to get jobs and join the workplace. A lot of companies dropping apprenticeships. How have you experienced that in your market, in your experience?
Oh, toughie. Have you got any specific experience, Victoria, before I mention it more?
It's something that we have given a lot of consideration to, actually, and we've recently hired a trainee actuarial analyst, and there was 2 people that we really liked, and honestly we were splitting hairs. So we obviously offered somebody, and the other person that we liked, he reached out to me directly and asked if we could do something for him, maybe if it was a summer placement or something like that, or if he could have some sort of mentoring sessions with the chief actuarial officer and the actuary. So we discussed it and said, yeah, we can offer something. We really liked him. We liked his work ethic. He was holding down a job whilst at university. His dissertation had kind of gone awry. He kind of had to start from scratch. And he was also competing with rowing competitively. So he's juggling quite a few things. So we liked that about him, and we thought, right, we want to try and offer something for him as well. And, we worked out the costings for what this would be for like 6 weeks, 12 weeks, which is minimal in terms of what we're offering people as a salary. And when I spoke to Talbot, our CEO, about it, he said to me, he said, why don't we just hire him permanently? He said, if you like him and you think he's talent, let's just hire him permanently. And that's what we've done. And he's one of the ones that started on Monday. So as a consideration, one of the young people who hasn't moved to London as well actually started on the day the company went into lockdown. And he was struggling a bit with it. But now he's in the opinion that he loves it as well. We as a consideration, it's one of the Q&As that we've got as a prep for the town hall tomorrow as to what we're planning to do as a company. Do we have the answers at this point in time? No, we don't. Will we have training face to face? Yes, absolutely. But we just have to work out what that looks like. We've hired an assistant accountant who starts next month, and he's still going through his ACC qualifications, so we've already put some study in place for that. In terms of the people partner that's coming to join me, she is in the process of doing her CIPD, so that's going to be like a transfer from her current company to us, so we will pick up the cost of that as well. So it's very much on our radar, but equally it's very much work in progress as well.
Thank you for that. And more broadly, Chris and Adam, are you seeing a reduction in the demand for HR junior positions, apprenticeships, etc., as a result of the lockdown?
I'll let Adam cover HR specifically. I just wanted to make a point. I'm happy to share this document because it's a roundtable we actually did with energy utility skills a while back around apprenticeships. I think, look, the apprenticeship scheme itself has been broken for almost from the second it started. It's got fundamental challenges, and actually the first roundtable we ran was around how investors value human capital within organisations. And actually, some of the big employers in the, these are huge employers in the energy utility sector whose apprenticeship levy, tots up to a significant amount of money. Their payroll is significant. Who aren't able, it's made incredibly difficult for them to permeate their their apprenticeship levy down through their supply chain, which is something you're supposed to be able to actually support smaller businesses to engage apprentices in through the supply chain of a sector, and actually they've really struggled with it. So I think apprenticeships have got their challenges in terms of young people into that industry. I think one of the things that the energy utility sector has done particularly well is actually look at sector attractiveness and actually looked at the fact that they are essentially in the environmental sustainability space. If you're Thames Water, Severn Trent, you could either see yourself as you're in the wastewater and digging holes industry, or you can see yourself that you're at the forefront of environmental change and environmental impact. And I think a lot of that is positioning and the sector, and lots of you guys will work in lots of different industry sectors. I think there's a method there for collaboration of engaging younger people towards the business. In terms of the current environment we're working in, absolutely. I think those entry-level jobs are harder to come by. But I think, Adam, if you wouldn't mind mentioning, we were on a different roundtable, weren't we, with Mr. Blair, who started up a business who goes some way to try and address this and look at alternatives to maybe university graduates or apprenticeship schemes. And there are some creative ways of trying to overcome that and give these people opportunities. So I'll hand over to Adam, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity for organisations really to reset. I think right now, can we categorically say that there's been a decline in entry level or junior positions, or more specifically, an appetite to invest in apprentices? I think to a certain extent, yes. I think right now, the majority of the work that we've seen come through and the majority of the activity in the market is disproportionately towards the senior end, much more transformation focused, reorg, organizational effectiveness, right sizing, etc., etc. But I also think that we've had a couple of very interesting conversations with some of our sizable clients in more corporate markets who are now looking at breeding the next generation of leader, and actually, rather than have your conventional, more linear career trajectory within a generalist HR area, so starting out as a HR administrator, stepping into an officer role and an advisor role, etc., etc., they're looking at bringing people in from more diverse backgrounds to look at the link between things like facilities or estates and environment and the link with the people agenda and the people strategy. So it's trying to create new, unique, very progressive hybrid roles, which do require slightly different skills. So, like all things, if you're a junior individual that's interested in joining HR, I just think it will be a slightly different world of work. And I think that the trajectory and the career path will take a slightly different avenue. But right now, the majority of the focus that we've seen come through has been on senior transformational hiring. But, like many hires in functional areas, it's very much seasonal. And I think maybe post-Christmas, early into the new year, we'll see that investment back into the future leader type talent pool. Okay,
cool. Let's wait and see. I'm going to combine together the next two questions for Victoria, I think. So one of them is specifically about maintaining team spirit and a sense of connection, and the other is more broadly about creating the right culture, recognizing that people are not working face to face. So do you have any specific plans to address these things, Victoria?
So a lot of the teams, as you know, in terms of insurance, when people move, may tend to follow each other. So we've got a lot of teams that have worked together before, which I think helps. There's a lot of people who live quite close together. So we're looking at maybe having some sort of regional hubs. As an example, we've got quite a few people that live East Sussex. We've got quite a few people that live sort of Chelmsford way as well. So rather than having a sort of base in London where people have to travel in and they necessarily don't want to do that, we will look at having some locations there that people can travel to. In terms of the culture, I think Talbir is he's very considerate of his employees, and he treats the whole business and the people like a family, and that very much comes across. I think we'll need to do some more town halls. The town hall that we've got tomorrow is the first one that they've done since we went into lockdown. There's much more around some of the employee engagement initiatives that we can do We're looking to have some more lunch and learns. They used to have that when they were in the office, but that's obviously died a bit of a death now. So we're looking to reinstate that. We're looking to have sort of buddy systems as well. And we're obviously looking to get a training provider on board as well.
Okay, yeah, so quite a lot of stuff that you're doing to address that. And obviously being a startup, you've got the chance to do it right from the start. I'm going to move on to, there's a couple of questions about people who, for example, Sarah's question, people who prefer to be based in an office, even if, working from home is the preference. Do any of you have any experience of handling people like that? I mean, I guess there may be some people at Volante who prefer to be in an office.
So one of the questions in the working from home survey was if people wanted to return to the office, continue to work from home, or a combination of both. And there was only 2 people that said they wanted to return to the office, and one caveated that by saying they were flexible with whatever the company wanted to do, and the other person only wanted to be in the office 3 days a week. So we are considerate of people that do want to be in the office more than the sort of twice a month or whatever it might be. So we will look to have enough space where we would maybe have up to like maybe 20 people at the time. In terms of London, our population in London is around 50, but we wouldn't be looking to host 50 people in the office at the one time. But that's where we would have, that's where I need to speak to the MDs to find out what the teams want to do, and if people do want to have some sort of rotation.
Just a small point on this, Craig. Adam and I were talking about this earlier, actually, and Adam alluded to it around what this lockdown and has created. I think it's shifted leadership attitudes to lots of things, but I think around working environment it has. And the extreme of that is what Victoria's described in terms of moving to a solely work from home business. But we were talking about, so I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago, which was the people and property director for Lloyds Banking Group, who talked about that balance. If you were to look at that as a budget, how do you spend your money across your property portfolio and on your people? And actually, there's lots of big corporates now saying, look, I'd rather spend less money on a 9,000 person facility in Canary Wharf and actually spend that money on engaging our workforce and supporting our people and giving them a workplace that fits the tasks they're doing, rather than just the requirement for them to be in the office. I can give ourselves a small pat on the back here. In the pre-lockdown, we were adapting our workspace to be less team-focused and more task-based. So if there's certain tasks that you want to do, this is a better working environment for you. I guess what we've done is just bolt working from home onto that and say, actually, for some tasks, the best place for you to be is from home or from an environment that isn't our office. But I think that's a really interesting link to see that probably property, your facilities team, your estates team, and your HR team probably weren't intertwined all that indelibly in the past. But I think, look, what's the purpose of a workplace other than to get the best out of your teams? And actually, I think that conversation has probably come to the fore now, and people are looking at their workspace, going, look, do we need that size and space in order to move forward? But equally, actually, what are we hoping to achieve by having this working environment? And I know, last point on this, that Land Securities, I happen to know their health and safety director who's just recently moved on, but they moved from an 8-floor building in London to a single floor to allow greater communication, greater interaction between people across the business, and they certainly saw the value in that. So I think it's made people question what the purpose of the workplace is, and it's probably made people think about workplace rather than just office.
Okay, cool. I'm conscious of time. We've only got a few minutes left, and I want to make some closing remarks. Maybe just do one more from this list. So what advice would HR give to nominated work buddies for their first time engagement with a new hire? And so is there any kind of secret formula for being an effective buddy?
I guess somebody that wants to do it is a good start. I guess no different from being in the office. I mean, virtual, drinks, virtual lunches, just checking in, that sort of thing. Maybe like once a week, maybe once a day, whatever it might be. I guess it would be different if you were in the office. You would probably go for lunch or drinks or whatever. But just maintaining that sort of face-to-face contact as well, and maybe having buddying up people who are not necessarily at the same level as well, I think is quite a good idea. You know, somebody that's maybe slightly more seasoned, so that kind of gets into that whole mentoring thing as well. But somebody equally in the business where they can learn from, not just from their line manager.
Sounds good to me.
I can go in there. Just a good connector, so somebody that wants to do it, but also is a good connector internally within your business. I think it's not about that, just about that one-to-one relationship. It's about how it kind of fans out from there. So someone who's a good connector internally. How you measure that, I'll leave to you, Greg.
Just one question from me, which I was pretty interested in from your perspective, Chris and Adam, is about the market for HR people generally. And are you seeing reduction in number of roles? Are you seeing salary deflation? Is there hope for HR candidates out there?
I think I'll interject on this one. So I think we factored in quite a significant downturn in trading when lockdown happened, and I think whilst we did initially see that, we've certainly come through the other side of that and seen an uptick. It is very much focused on transformational roles, companies moving to either centralized or more federated models. I think a lot of companies that do have a lot in the war chest are actually looking to invest more into their people part and into their people functions, and organizations now are capitalizing where others are more challenged or shedding. So actually there's been a bit of a flurry, and I think that, you know, seasonally speaking, as we go through summer, there's always a bit of a lull, but you know, we've certainly seen the increase over the past, I'd say 6 to 8 weeks, and actually looking at where we are this time compared to last year, I'd say we're probably ahead. So there is very much there's life out there. I think it is very much sector specific at this moment in time. But my advice would be, I think, to try and position yourself as a sort of change agent rather than a change passenger, and look at the more transformational elements to your role. But obviously happy to have that dialogue offline if need be.
Cool. Sounds really good.
I think the HR industry deserves a huge pat on the back. This is not to ingratiate myself to all the participants today, but I think that, look, it's been an incredibly tough time for business, and HR tend to be at the forefront of that. You know, difficult conversations, difficult decision making. HR are heavily involved in that and are often they often bear the brunt of the associated workload. So look, a virtual round of applause from me, because I think some of the work done by HR professionals goes largely unrecognised. So kudos from me to everyone.
Great. Well, we're approaching the end of our allotted time, so I'd like to say thank you very much to Victoria, to Chris, and to Adam. Great session, some really good insights and experience shared. So thank you. Sorry if I didn't get around to answering everybody's questions, but I'm sure you'll be happy for the to follow up with you directly through email or whatever. So that's great. There will be a recording available shortly for this event, which will also be shared with others. So watch out for it. Watch out for future events as well. Watch out for on our website, London HR Connection. Also via our LinkedIn group. Please join our LinkedIn group if you're not currently a member of that group. We also have a mailing list, which we keep you up to date via email as well. So many ways in which we can keep you up to date with what's happening. And if you've enjoyed the event today, please do spread the word. We're always looking for new members. That's all for now. So take care of yourself, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much. Bye now.
Right. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Take care.